Have you ever made a decision, closed the door behind it, and spent the next few weeks quietly wondering if you just ruined your life? What if I chose the wrong career? What if I should have stayed? What if the other option, the one you didn't take, was actually the better one? Psychology says this isn't because you're bad at making decisions. It's because your brain was never designed to simply accept a choice and move on. It was designed to keep imagining the life you didn't choose, quietly, persistently, sometimes for years. This isn't a flaw unique to you. It's a mechanism running in the background of nearly every mind, shaping how confident or how haunted you feel about the decisions that built your life. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why your brain does this and what to do when it won't stop. Here's something rarely explained clearly. Your brain doesn't stop evaluating a decision the moment you make it. Psychologists call this ongoing mental process counterfactual thinking, the automatic tendency to imagine alternative outcomes to events that have already happened. This isn't a glitch. It evolved for a practical reason. Early humans who mentally reviewed past decisions and imagined better alternatives were often better prepared to make improved decisions in the future. But this same mechanism, applied to major modern life choices, produces a strange side effect. Your brain doesn't just learn from a decision, it keeps running an invisible comparison indefinitely against a version of life it never actually got to observe. This is why the job you didn't take can still occasionally cross your mind years later, glowing slightly brighter than reality, precisely because it never had the chance to disappoint you. Understanding this mechanism is the first step, but to understand why it feels so persistent, you have to understand how your brain builds decisions in the first place. Maximizing versus satisficing.
Studying decision-making describe two distinct approaches people use when choosing between options. Maximizers attempt to evaluate every available option thoroughly, searching for the objectively best possible outcome before deciding. Satisficers, by contrast, choose the first option that meets their personal standard of good enough, then move forward without continuing to search. Research consistently shows something counterintuitive. Maximizers, despite often making objectively strong decisions, tend to report lower satisfaction with those decisions than satisficers do. The reason is straightforward. Maximizing keeps the evaluation process open indefinitely. There's always another option that theoretically could have been better, and the mind knows it. Picture two people choosing where to live. One researches for months, comparing every possible neighborhood, and still wonders afterward if another area would have been better. The other picks a place that meets their core needs, moves in, and rarely looks back. Both may end up equally happy, objectively, but only one of them stops checking. However, comparison alone doesn't fully explain why certain decisions haunt us more than others. There's a second force working underneath it. Neuroscientists studying decision-making have identified a powerful bias called loss aversion, the tendency for potential losses to feel roughly twice as psychologically intense as equivalent potential gains. This means choosing one path doesn't just feel like gaining something, it simultaneously feels like losing everything the other path might have offered, and that loss registers more intensely than the gain does. This connects directly to a modern experience most people know well, the fear of missing out. Every chosen path implicitly closes off every other path, and the brain, wired for loss aversion, pays disproportionate attention to what's been closed off. This is why choosing a specific career can feel less like gaining a direction and more like losing every other version of your life you might have lived instead. The amygdala, a small structure deep in the brain associated with threat detection, plays a role here too, treating the discomfort of a foreclosed option almost like a minor, persistent alarm, even when no real danger exists. But this alarm becomes significantly louder under one very specific, very modern condition. Modern life presents an extraordinary volume of choices, career paths, relationship structures, cities to live in, ways to spend nearly every hour of the day. Psychologists refer to the paralysis this can create as choice overload, a measurable decline in decision satisfaction and confidence once the number of available options exceeds what the brain can meaningfully compare. This is compounded by decision fatigue, a well-documented phenomenon in which the quality of decision-making deteriorates after a person has already made numerous decisions earlier in the day. The prefrontal cortex, the brain region primarily responsible for reasoning, planning, and weighing long-term consequences, functions like a muscle with limited endurance. Heavy use throughout the day measurably reduces its effectiveness by evening.
This is why a major life decision considered late at night after a mentally demanding day often feels far more overwhelming than the exact same decision considered fresh the next morning. The circumstances haven't changed. The available cognitive resources have. But even with full cognitive resources, some people still find themselves stuck entirely, unable to move forward at all. Analysis paralysis and how uncertainty hijacks the brain. When a decision feels sufficiently important and sufficiently uncertain, some people enter a state psychologists describe as analysis paralysis, an inability to commit, caused by excessive deliberation rather than insufficient information. Neuroimaging research on uncertainty has found that ambiguous, high-stakes decisions activate the anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region involved in detecting conflict and monitoring errors, more intensely than decisions with clearer, more predictable outcomes. In practical terms, this means uncertainty itself is processed by the brain almost like an unresolved problem requiring constant attention, even when no new information is available to resolve it. This is why some people can spend months circling a decision without new facts ever emerging. The brain isn't waiting for more information. It's stuck in a loop of monitoring perceived risk that no amount of thinking alone can fully resolve. Consider someone deciding whether to leave a stable job to start a business. The spreadsheet stays the same for weeks, but the anterior cingulate cortex keeps flagging the uncertainty as unresolved, producing a persistent, exhausting sense that more thinking is required, even when it isn't. This raises an uncomfortable question. If overthinking doesn't resolve uncertainty, why do so many intelligent people rely on it so heavily? Why smart people often struggle more with decisions? Here's a pattern that surprises many people. Higher cognitive ability doesn't necessarily make decisions easier. In some cases, it makes them harder. Intelligent, analytically minded individuals are often better at generating detailed counterfactual scenarios, vivid, specific imagined alternatives, precisely because of their strong reasoning and imaginative capabilities. This means the same cognitive strength that helps someone excel professionally can also generate more convincing, more detailed versions of the path not taken. Additionally, individuals who are used to solving problems through analysis sometimes over-apply that strategy to decisions that don't actually respond well to further analysis. Decisions involving personal values, uncertain futures, or incomplete information no amount of thinking can fully resolve. This is why a highly capable person can sometimes struggle more with choosing a life direction than someone who trusts a simpler decision-making process. The tool that works brilliantly for solvable problems doesn't always work as well for ambiguous ones. But intelligence isn't the only factor generating this internal noise. Imagination plays an equally powerful, equally distorting role. How imagination creates fake perfect futures. The unchosen option in your mind isn't real. It's a construction, built entirely from imagination, unconstrained by the actual friction, disappointment, and complexity that any real path inevitably contains. Psychologists studying affective forecasting, our ability to predict how future events will make us feel, have found that people are consistently inaccurate at imagining both positive and negative outcomes, tending to overestimate the emotional intensity and duration of both. This means the imagined other life isn't just idealized, it's fundamentally unreliable as a comparison because it skips every difficult, ordinary, imperfect detail the real, chosen path actually has to work through. Dopamine plays a role here too. Anticipated rewards, including imagined alternative futures, activate dopamine pathways associated with motivation and desire, even when that future was never actually pursued and never actually tested against reality. This is why the unchosen city, unchosen relationship, or unchosen career so often feels golden in hindsight. It never had the chance to disappoint you the way real, lived experience inevitably does. Understanding this reframes something many people misinterpret as failure, the persistent ache of wondering what if. Why regret is often grief, not failure. Regret is frequently misunderstood as evidence of a wrong decision. Psychologically, it's often something closer to grief, mourning a version of life that was never actually lived, rather than confirming that the chosen path was mistaken. Grief, in this context, doesn't require an actual loss of something once possessed. It can also apply to the loss of a possibility, a life that existed only in imagination,
but still felt real enough to form an emotional attachment to. This distinction matters enormously. Grief doesn't need to be solved or reversed. It needs to be acknowledged and eventually allowed to settle. Treating persistent regret as proof of a wrong decision often traps people in endless reevaluation. Recognizing it instead as a normal grieving process for an unlived possibility allows for something healthier, acknowledgement followed by genuine movement forward. This reframe alone changes how many major life decisions feel in hindsight, not necessarily mistakes, but simply the natural cost of choosing one real life over countless imagined ones. But understanding the psychology behind this pattern isn't enough on its own. There's also a practical way to work with it. A practical framework for trusting your decisions. Psychologists and decision researchers have identified several practical strategies that help reduce this specific kind of post-decision distress. The enough rule involves deliberately choosing the first option that meets clearly defined personal criteria, rather than continuing to search for a theoretical best, directly countering the dissatisfaction associated with maximizing. A decision deadline sets a firm point at which further deliberation stops and action begins, preventing the endless loop the anterior cingulate cortex tends to generate around unresolved uncertainty. The experiment mindset reframes major decisions not as permanent irreversible verdicts, but as informed trials, reducing the perceived stakes enough to lower the intensity of loss aversion. A structured 90-day review method involves revisiting a decision only at a predetermined checkpoint, rather than continuously, which interrupts the exhausting habit of daily reevaluation. And finally, deliberately closing mental tabs, consciously acknowledging an unchosen option, then intentionally directing attention away from it, helps prevent the kind of open-ended comparison that keeps a decision feeling perpetually unfinished. None of these strategies eliminate uncertainty. They simply prevent uncertainty from being reprocessed endlessly, long after a decision has already been made. Consider the career you chose, the relationship you stayed in or left, the city you moved to, the business you started or didn't. None of these decisions were ever going to be perfect. No decision, examined closely enough, ever fully is. Confidence was never going to come from making a flawless choice. It comes from something quieter and considerably more sustainable, trusting yourself after you've made one. The version of your life you didn't choose was never actually better. It was simply unfinished, and unfinished things are always easier to imagine as perfect. The life you're actually living is the only one that's real enough to build something with. If this changed how you think about the decisions still sitting in front of you, there's more of this kind of thinking waiting. Subscribe, and we'll keep exploring what psychology reveals about the choices that shape a life.